When was the very first time you can remember ever doing something that people might look at and say that's not very kind to an animal? How young were you?
I broke a lizard's back with a rock.
And how old were you?
3.
Okay. And how come you did? What do you remember about doing that?
Something me and my brother did. We went around killing lizards.
Okay. So
sometimes I skin them alive. Sometimes I set them on fire.
Okay, the lizards?
Yeah.
When did you start skinning the lizards alive?
I just taped him to a little table, and I took a knife and I just scraped and
okay. And about,
skin off.
how old were you the first time you did that, do you think?
4.
Okay. And then what about setting them on fire? How would you do that?
Take a lighter. They burn instantly.
How would they react?
Burn instantly.
Will they burn instantly? Do they make any movement or sound or anything?
They start curling up and
Okay.
then just fall.
Just remain standing, please.
Good afternoon, sir. Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Thank you, sir. You may be seated. Please state your full name and spell your last name for the record.
Charles L. Scott, S-C-O-T-T, comma, M.D.
Thank you. State your name, inquire.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Dr. Scott.
Good afternoon.
What is your occupation?
I am director of the Division of Law and Psychiatry at the University of California, Davis. So I'm a forensic psychiatrist there, and so I'm a professor of clinical psychiatry at UC Davis, and I teach in the fellowship and direct that fellowship as well.
Okay. Are you board certified?
Yes, I am.
What are you board certified in?
I'm board certified in 4 areas. So I'm board certified in general psychiatry, and general psychiatry is typically evaluating and treating individuals who are 18 or older. I'm also board certified in child and adolescent psychiatry, so that is typically evaluating individuals from birth to up to 18. I'm board certified in forensic psychiatry, and then I'm board certified in addiction psychiatry.
And who certifies you?
I'm certified by the American Board of Psychiatry and Neurology. The acronym is ABPN.
And how do you become board certified?
First, you have to complete an accredited training program or meet the requirements of completing a certain body of knowledge. You then go through a series of examinations, and if you pass the examinations, you can become board certified.
Okay. And you've done that for both general psychiatry, child and adolescent psychiatry, forensic psychology, psychiatry, and addiction psychiatry?
Yes.
Okay. And do you have any medical licenses?
Yes, I do.
Where?
I'm medically licensed in the state of California, the state of Alaska, and for the purposes of evaluating Mr. Cruz, I obtained a special license here in Florida so that I could evaluate him.
Okay. And your current position at University of California, Davis, what does that entail?
So it has a range of activities. So I am chief of the Division of Psychiatry and Law. I also run a training program on how to train other general psychiatrists. They've already completed their general psychiatry training on how to be a forensic psychiatrist. And then for many years, I evaluated and treated inmates at the Sacramento County Jail. And also for over 20 years, I've worked with evaluating patients who've claimed insanity at the time of the act and looking at their risk of violence and dangerousness, and also assessing individuals in both the jail setting, but also the forensic hospital setting, who are maybe faking, claiming that they're hearing voices or that they're brain damaged. And so that's part of my work, but also what I train other people in doing.
And how long have you been doing that?
Gosh, well, I've been at UC Davis since 1998, so almost 25 years, but I was working as a forensic psychiatrist prior to that.
Okay. And do you have any other duties?
I do. I also have to publish and write books and things and articles, and that gets into the mix as well.
Okay. Do you do anything for NASA?
Right. So outside the university, I have two other main consulting responsibilities. One is I work with Houston's NASA program, and I'm on the selection board for the astronauts. And so we do the final, it's called a suitability assessment to see if they're suitable to go to space. And so this past round, we selected the final four who will be the first to go on the Artemis missions and back to the moon. The other thing that I do is I'm a national trainer for the American Academy of Psychiatry and the Law. And so there are 4 national faculty people, professors typically, and we have an annual conference where we train other psychiatrists how to do these type of evaluations in court, how to meet certain standards, what the appropriate process is if you're evaluating someone who is facing many different parts of the criminal justice system, from competency to facing a capital sentence.
Could you tell us about your education starting with your undergraduate degree?
Sure. So I started off at Emory University, that's in Atlanta, Georgia, and I ended up getting got a scholarship over to St. Andrews in Scotland, and ended up graduating from Emory, and after that I went into Emory Medical School.
Okay. And you graduated when?
I graduated in 1982 from undergraduate. As you get older, sometimes it's a little harder. And then in 1982, I went to Emory Medical School.
Okay. And how about, do you have rotations in medical school?
Sure. So
What kind of rotations did you have?
Yeah, medical school is 4 years. And so after you do the first 2 years of didactics, you have different clinical rotations you're required to go on. And that's helpful because it helps the med students decide what field they may want to go to. So some of the ones that I did, I had 2 months where I worked on obstetrics and gynecology, and then 2 months where I also worked in pediatrics. I initially thought that would probably be my field, pediatrics, but then I found psychiatry.
Okay. And how about internships?
So after I completed medical school, I couldn't afford the med school, so the Army paid my way through. But there's a little bit of a quid pro quo. So because the Army paid for med school for me, I went to Walter Reed Army Medical Center. It's in Washington, D.C. And so I did my internship and a good bit of my subsequent training with the military. And so my first internship was at Walter Reed in Washington, D.C.
Okay. And how long were you in the Army?
I was in the Army 13 years.
Okay. How about any fellowship for child and adolescent psychiatry?
Yes. So when I did the internship, I again rotated and had more exposure to both OBGYN and to pediatrics. So I had more responsibility because now I'm an intern. So I could assist or deliver with the deliveries on pediatrics. I worked in the neonatal intensive care units and on the healthy baby units, if you will. And because I had an interest in psychiatry, I knew after I completed my general psychiatry training, I would like to go on and do child psychiatry. So that's what happened. After I did my internship, I stayed at Walter Reed, and then I did 3 years of general psychiatry training there.
Okay, and how about forensic psychiatry?
Yes, so forensic followed my 2 years of child and adolescent. So I kind of went over to the West Coast, completed 2 years of child and adolescent psychiatry, had a lot of focus on evaluating youth with developmental disabilities, with autism, with potential fetal alcohol spectrum disorder in our disabilities clinic. And then after I finished that 2 years, that was kind of a combined program with UCSF, University of California, San Francisco. I completed my military obligation, so I went over to Germany where I was stationed and to El Paso, Texas, and I was really in charge there of screening, evaluating, and treating children and adolescents who were service members' kids. And during that time frame, I came into contact with a lot of legal cases. Sometimes service members get in trouble. And so I was evaluating cases that had a legal component, and that made me interested in forensic psychiatry. And so I ultimately went and did my forensic psychiatry training, which is another year at Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland.
Okay. During your career, you mentioned publications. Have you published?
Yes, I have.
What are some of the subjects that you published that were peer-reviewed?
Right, so for peer-reviewed articles, and I think I have around 68 or 69 articles in general, but some of the peer-reviewed articles deal specifically with the evaluation of malingering, which I'll explain maybe later, but it's kind of the faking or exaggeration of symptoms for a secondary gain, meaning for a reason. You're trying to fool somebody to get something you want. So I have published articles related to that. Other articles I published are really looking at different types of aggression. And so we've done some research at the hospital where I worked at. So we're studying what's the difference between someone who might have impulsive aggression, where they act kind of very quickly without thinking, as compared to more planned, predatory aggression. And so those are two major categories that we've studied and looked at and I've published on. Other areas that I've spent a good bit of time writing about and have published some peer review articles on are the relationship to mental illness and violence. As a psychiatrist, I think it's important, and we try to emphasize this as a psychiatrist, that the vast majority of people who are mentally ill are not violent. So you don't automatically assume just because someone has a mental illness they're going to be violent. So that's not a fair stigma, if you will. So we look at what are those factors that distinguish individuals with a mental illness who may become violent. What are specific disorders that are higher risk, and then how do you determine if someone allegedly has a disorder, that disorder was related, if at all, to the violence that they committed. And so those are some of the main areas that for the articles that I published on.
What does peer review mean?
So peer review means that you submit a writing to a journal, and then if it's a traditional peer review process, the journal will have a board of other folks that are usually in the academic field. They'll review the article, they may give you feedback, accept it, ask for revisions, things like that, and then it can be published. And there are other forms of peer review where you may be asked to write an article or a book chapter. So it's an invited, but then it's also reviewed by peers. And then a third type of article writing is where it's submitted, but there's no peer review.
Okay. How about chapters in books?
Yeah, similarly, I think I've written maybe 54 or so book chapters, and so chapters on very similar topics. So the assessment of malingering, how people may fake in the criminal justice system, chapters on dangerousness, some chapters, or a chapter on psychiatric disability, violence and aggression, mental illness. All of those similar themes are also been published in chapters.
And have you had the opportunity to do any editing?
Yes, I've edited 7 books, and so those usually are on, most of the books are on what we call correctional psychiatry. So these are individuals who do become involved in the criminal justice system and kind of following their care path, assessment, and outcomes through the criminal justice system. And then other books, one other book is called the textbook or Principles and Practice of Forensic Psychiatry. So I co-edited that with a colleague, and it really is a comprehensive book about our field.
Okay, so what is forensic psychiatry?
Yeah, that's a great question. A lot of times, people, when I say I do forensic psychiatry, they ask how I talk to dead people, and I say it's not what forensic psychiatry is. All forensic really means is legal. So whatever your field is, so for psychiatry, you're trained to evaluate an issue that's in front of you for legal purposes. So you could have forensic dentistry or forensic entomology. So forensic psychiatry looks at that aspect of mental illness that interfaces with a law. And the reason this became a field, it became a field accredited in 1996 by the American Board of Psychiatry and Neurology, because there was grave concerns through many courtrooms in the country that people who were not trained in forensics might go to court, say, well, this person has a disorder, so therefore they did X, Y, and Z, without any evidence to support that. So we've worked very hard to establish actual standards if someone is evaluating someone with a claimed mental disorder to see whether or not they meet the standard that's before them in court.
Okay, and you mentioned, all your training. Could you give us what your specific training in some detail to become a forensic psychiatrist?
Sure. So at Case Western Reserve, we had specific training on the assessment, again, of malingering. This is the faking or exaggeration of symptoms. And so that might be looking at, does the person have inconsistencies in their report over time? Or something that they're telling you inconsistent with what the actual record is? Because, I failed every class, you open up the record, and they had straight A's. That's an inconsistency. And then you look at how does testing play a role in supporting their claim of what they're claiming. And so there's really talented psychologists out there and who do specific testing to evaluate if folks are faking or not. So that was one area. Dangerousness is another major area. Looking at someone's mental state at the time of the offense. So what do I mean by that? What were they thinking when they did the crime? So how do you do, we call it going retrospectively back in time to try to understand why the person did it, what were the facts that led up to it, what do the records show about their behaviors before, during, and after, and that is a specific type of forensic training that we've gone through. And then again, looking at the different types of aggression.
Have you ever testified as an expert in forensic psychiatry?
Yes.
Approximately how many times?
I would say 75 to 100 times.
And in what courts?
I've testified in many different state courts, federal courts, appellate courts, and military court-martials.
And so how does forensic psychiatry differ from general psychiatry and psychology and even pediatrics, which you've had an internship with?
Yeah, so it's significantly different because people who aren't forensically trained may, for example, never look at a police report or a witness statement or videos of the crime, and yet they'll reach an opinion about someone's culpability or responsibility without any evidence to support that opinion. And so that's a huge different aspect. The other thing that's very important for forensic psychiatry is that you got to look at collateral records. So how did the person actually do versus how are they telling you they did? Or how is the testing telling you that they did? A person can come out a certain way on a test. It doesn't necessarily mean that's reflective of who they are or how they're thinking or how they can think. So that's a huge difference. And now we actually have written guidelines on the forensic assessment that people should follow, when they do these type of evaluations for court.
So with reference to this case, Dr. Scott, when were you contacted?
Yeah, I was first contacted on November the 11th, 2021.
Okay, and what is your fee arrangement through University of California, Davis?
Yes, so I work for UC Davis, and so they charge for my time. They charge $500 an hour for my time. The monies go to UC Regents. There is a fee split schedule where the dean gets a significant amount, the department gets a significant amount, And if our department is doing well, the faculty member can receive the remainder.
Okay. And approximately how many hours have you invested in this case?
I would say 400 to 500.
Okay. And what records did you review with reference to this case?
Yeah, there was just volumes of record, probably over 500. So I'm going to try to just break it down so it makes sense to me and I can easily explain it. First, I looked at records related to the crime itself. So this gets into things like the police reports, the witness statements, depositions that were taken, and court testimony relevant to the case. Now I'm going to kind of start back with what I did as relevant to evaluating Mr. Cruz. So I'll kind of start from the beginning. So I looked at his birth mother's adoption records. There were over 1,000 pages of records in that group. But I also looked at his younger brother's adoption records to see if there was any reference to the birth mother as it related to Mr. Cruz. I looked at his delivery records. I looked at the mother's OBGYN records when she came to deliver Mr. Cruz. I looked at his pediatric records. He was seen by a Dr. Marcus most of the time during his life. I also looked at different psychiatric treatment records for him over time, and there were several. And he had several different child and adolescent psychiatrists. I looked at his educational and school records, starting from pre-K all the way through an off-campus learning center, and this involved lots of individualized education plans, different counseling. He was in ESE classes, so I reviewed those as well. When we go over to his occupation, I looked at his occupational records. When it gets to more information related to this particular offense, I also looked at his social media profile, and that can include things like his searches on the internet, postings to YouTube, all that sort of thing. I looked at cell phone videos he made prior to this, committing this offense. I think there were 3 of them. I looked at text messages that he had while on the Uber ride over to the school. I looked at the school video, so everything from when he entered the school floors 1, 2, and 3, exiting the school. I looked at the Walmart video footage. I looked at the McDonald's video footage. And so that encapsulates a lot of the actual factual information and video footage of the crime. There have also been several experts, both by the defense and by the state. So I reviewed their records, their testing, their notes, their depositions, their court testimonies. And I've also looked at the evaluation done by the neuropsychologist retained by the state. There was a video of that deposition. And then I've looked at several pieces of court testimony that's been already presented to you during the course of this trial.
Okay. Dr. Scott, did you have an opportunity to evaluate the defendant in this case, Nikolas Cruz?
Yes, I did.
And when was that?
I evaluated Mr. Cruz on March 1, 2, and 3 of 2022.
And how long was each session?
Each session ranged between like 7, maybe 7.5, up to 8 hours would have been the longest, but they were all days were full days, and it was conducted here at the Broward County Jail.
Okay, and did you have breaks in those sessions?
Sure, we had a few breaks. You know, Mr. Cruz was told from the get-go that if he ever needed a break, his attorney was also present during the entirety of the evaluation. If the attorney needed a break, I sure wanted them to ask me and we could take a break. And then we took a lunch break. Usually it was about an hour. And it was a little cold in the room. And so I know that Mr. Cruz reported that he felt a little chilly and cold. So although he was handcuffed, we made sure, the officers made sure he was warm and put a sweater over him to make sure he was comfortable.
Okay. Was the entirety of your evaluation of the defendant audio taped and videotaped?
Yes. Even if there was a break, I asked that the recording continue, so everyone would know if I was in the room alone with Mr. Cruz, you could just watch and see. I tended to just sort of be quiet and put my head down and wait for the attorney to get back, but everything was recorded.
And how did you conduct your evaluation?
So, first I started off before interviewing Mr. Cruz. It was important because I was likely only going to have one opportunity to interview him, to review the records that were available prior to interviewing him. So that would be step one. If you're going to ask somebody about a crime, you should know some aspects about the crime when you do the evaluation. And then I proceeded to let him know who retained me. I was retained by the state, what the purpose of the evaluation was, that wasn't confidential, that anything he said, obviously, it's being videotaped, his attorney was present, it was being recorded, and it could be shown and shared with the jury ultimately if that's where it went. And then I proceeded to do a very structured interview asking him about a lot of different areas of his life and a detailed assessment of his memory of what happened on February the 14th, 2018.
Okay. And what diagnostic scheme did you use?
I used a manual, and I brought it with me. It's called the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, 5th edition. There's now been a text revision, but the criteria are basically the same, and that's the diagnostic manual I used.
Okay. There's been a lot of conversation about the DSM, Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. What exactly is it in the field of psychology and psychiatry?
Okay, well, it looks like this. You may have seen it. It's a different color than the one before. But it's the classification manual of how we make diagnoses and how we establish criteria. So let's say if you went to one psychiatrist or psychologist and you told them your symptoms, you sure hope that if you went to a second psychiatrist or psychologist, you sure hope they'd come up with a similar diagnosis. And so the manual is to help us and help all of us have what we call kind of a reliable diagnosis. So we have established criteria that have been established usually by research, by literature, and practice.
So if there's a disorder in the DSM, it would list what the criteria might be, right?
Yes.
Okay. And over the years, has the DSM been edited and, I don't want to say altered, but changes made, new additions?
Yes, so medicine evolves, and so psychiatry is a branch of medicine, so it evolves as well. So new information, updated information can be included, and sometimes the diagnostic criteria might change.
Okay. Have you ever had the opportunity to edit any book with reference to DSM-TR?
Yeah, this was an interesting project I got to do. So when the DSM-5 came out, there were some changes from the prior manual. And one Oxford, I think it was, publisher asked if I could unpack for the psychiatrists in America what were going to be the legal implications of changes of any of the diagnoses from a forensic standpoint. So I edited a book called DSM-5 and the Law, Changes and Challenges. And so it just went through any changes and how that might impact evaluation and rendering a forensic opinion.
Okay, DSM-5 came out, 2013, is that correct?
May of 2013, yes.
And TR is when?
TR was this past year.
Okay. So what diagnostic conclusions did you reach in this case?
Yeah, so I had 3 major diagnostic conclusions relevant to Mr. Cruz. The first one is he meets the criteria for a diagnosis called antisocial personality disorder, and we'll get more into that, what I mean by that. The second one is borderline personality disorder, and the third is malingering. And as we've talked about, malingering is gross exaggeration or just completely making up symptoms for a secondary gain, meaning something for a particular reason, right? So you're faking your symptoms to get something.
Okay. So with antisocial personality disorder, that's in the DSM-5 TR?
Yes.
Okay. So how did you reach a conclusion that the defendant had an antisocial personality disorder.
Right, so I carefully applied the criteria for the DSM-5 for antisocial personality disorder, and they give a definition of it, and then they have 7 specific criteria, and then you only have to meet, it's 3 or more. So you don't have to meet all 7, but you should meet at least 3.
So what is antisocial personality disorder?
That's a good question. Well, the first thing, I have to put my glasses on now. The first thing with antisocial personality disorder, you hear personality disorder, it's in this big book. How does that correlate with all the other disorders? And so at the beginning of this chapter, it starts off with a definition of personality disorder that distinguishes it from things like schizophrenia or severe depression, that type of thing. And the definition, just to kind of ground us a little bit, it's an enduring pattern of inner experience and behavior that deviates markedly from the norms and expectations of the individual's culture. It's pervasive and inflexible, has an onset in adolescence or early adulthood, is stable over time, and leads to distress or impairment. And then that's the general definition, and then antisocial personality disorder has its own very specific definition.
And what is that?
Okay, so one of the first overarching things you have to have antisocial personality disorder is a pervasive pattern of disregard for and violation of the rights of others. And you have to have it occurring since age 15. And then you have to have 3 or more. And there are 7 criteria, so I'll kind of march through the 7. But one example that kind of shows this sort of pattern and attitude, antisocial doesn't mean you're shy. Antisocial means that you're violating societal norms. So there was a period, for example, when Mr. Cruz was 15. There's an ESE teacher called Miss Nast. And so she's trying to talk to him about how come you don't stay in school, or why don't you like the school, or why are these kind of problems happening? And he told her, and he said, I'd much rather be out on the street setting fires and killing animals. And that's in the record. And that kind of is what, and that was a statement he made at age 15. And that is what's reflective of the kind of way a person with ASPD thinks, feels, and acts towards others. And so then you go through and you look at the 7 specific criteria.
Okay, and the first one would be?
Yeah, so the first criteria is, and I'm going to read it very carefully, failure to conform to social norms with respect to lawful behaviors, as indicated by repeatedly performing acts that are grounds for arrest. So I'll give you what I thought were strong examples of him meeting this one. On February the 14th, 2018, he murdered 17 people. That would count for that one. On February the 14th, 2018, he attempted to murder 17 people. That would count for that one. Even if you look prior to February the 14th, and you go from age 15 up to age 18, were there other examples? Take that day out of the mix. And the answer is absolutely yes. Multiple other examples. And I'm going to go over some that I recall.
Isn't there one that, in particular, that we have a clip for that you would be illustrative of that?
Yeah, there certainly is one of many. And so we can show the clip and then I can add the other ones on after.
Okay. Aaron, please.
Have you ever broken into
Yes, I
anybody's
see it.
home? Or
Zachary did.
what's that?
Zach did.
Yeah, how about you? Or a car even?
Yeah, I broke into cars. Steal change, junk change, find if it had any weapons or anything there.
Okay. And were you less than 15 when you broke into the cars?
A little bit older, 16.
Okay.
All right, so a couple things. Breaking into a car looking for weapons or chump change would be grounds for an arrest. That's unlawful behavior. So that would count. But he had several other ones in addition to that video clip that you saw. For example, he was found to be stealing bicycles after the age of 15. Even at Cross Creek or West Glades, one of the schools he went to, they were concerned and he got a petty theft. He was shoplifting, stealing other items. So he met several criteria under number 1.
Okay, how about number 2?
Number
By the way, that sweatshirt, that's what you were talking about being cold in there?
Yes.
Okay, okay.
Number 2, deceitfulness, as indicated by repeated lying, use of aliases, and that means you make up a name that's not yours, or conning others for personal profit or pleasure. So again, if you go through the records, there are a lot of examples. I'll give you just a few. So around December the 5th, 2013, Jennifer Klein, who was a psychologist that worked at one of the schools he was at, did a psychological evaluation of him. And as part of that psychological evaluation, she met with 3 teachers and she got their input. So one of the things that's noted in her report relevant to criteria number 2 is that all 3 teachers described him as, quote, deceiving others, close quote, and sneaking around. He was also noted, and these were additional records I didn't mention in my earlier testimony, but he was seen by Henderson Behavioral Health. A lot of outside health agencies came in to work with them. So in those records, it's noted that he frequently lies to the mother about a variety of events. At school, he's noted to lie and deceive to some of the teachers. So those were some of those that were relevant. Even approaching the day of the offense, again, February 14th, 2018, there were some incidents that kind of also demonstrate this conning, this lying, or manipulation of others. One may seem kind of benign, but it also shows a level of planning prior to the crime and trying to make sure his crime wouldn't be stopped, even if it was incidental. So what happened was, in January or so of 2018, he was playing around with a buddy. I think they had some sort of, air assault gun, pellet gun of some sort. He got a little shot in his abdomen and it hurt, so he definitely has pain. He responds to pain, and that made him mad, so he punched a gun safe in the house where he was staying. And this gun safe was the safe that he held his weapon in. And so he had to go to the doctor to have that fixed because he hurt his hand and maybe even fractured it. And so when the doctor asked him, hey, how did you hurt your hand? He told him a lie. He said, well, I fell and I heard it that way. And when asked, I think in my interview, why did you lie to the doctor? He said, well, I thought maybe they would connect if there was a gun safe and I'm presenting, maybe more questions would be asked, and I didn't want that to take away my gun, all right? So that was one aspect. In 2016, he had gotten in, and this is another criteria coming up, to a fight with a kid at school, and he also had had a threat assessment for another incident related. So the Florida Department of Children and Family Services comes out, and they're asking about a swastika that they had heard had been on a book bag, and on that book bag, it had also had a really derogatory term towards a race. It said something like effing N-word, something to that effect, along with a swastika. So reportedly, it's documented in the record that he told his mother, I didn't even know what that meant, I had no idea what that was, when the evidence was really strong that he was aware of what a swastika meant prior to that. And then on the morning and the day this happened, he has to get to school. He doesn't drive, and so he takes an Uber. And so when he takes the Uber driver picks him up, and he tells her a lie. And it's a very well thought out lie, because he needs her for him to get to Marjorie Stoneman Douglas. So he has, this sort of gun case carrying bag, and that could alert attention potentially, to someone. So it's presented as if it is part of maybe going to a music class, and there could be a large musical instrument in there. So again, he's conning her so he won't be stopped. So there was several evidence of this deceitfulness throughout the record.
Okay, and how about the third criteria?
Yeah, the third criteria is, are they impulsive or do they have difficulties planning ahead? And the West Glades school records are robust with examples of this. And so one particular teacher, Miss Carrie Yon, he was in her class in some parts during the 7th and 8th grade at West Glades, documented a lot of these kind of impulsive behaviors. Just a couple of examples that I can kind of recall offhand. So if she asked him to do something, sometimes he'd either tear up the paper, put a middle finger up, you effing B word, and then security would have to be called, so he'd have that consequence and would run out. There was another time where, again, security had to be called because he was also acting back up in class, and he ran out. It got to the point where he oftentimes had to, because of this kind of behavior, have a security detail work with him and follow him around because of that kind of impulsivity. He frequently, as noted in the records, might open the door, or if he's leaving, say, F you faggots, this kind of stuff, or F you, use words I won't repeat here, and that was kind of the pattern that was noted in the records.
Okay. How about criteria 4?
Yeah. Criteria 4 is, and you may, it's easy to get criteria 4 and 3 confused, so I'm going to explain the difference. Criteria 4 is irritability and aggressiveness as indicated by repeated physical fights or assaults. So the difference here, obviously he's kind of irritable when he's doing the finger and the F word, but this is something that leads to an actual physical assault. And so, again, Jennifer Klein and her psychological evaluation during this time frame specifically notes that in her evaluation, she learned that he would have feelings of revenge towards students, and so he would intentionally attack them or hit them. For his own mother, and this is when he's older than 15, there were 2 occasions noted in the records, one in the Henderson Behavioral Health records. It may have been a time where the mobile crisis team had to come out, where she tells them that he hit her, she fell to the ground, she hit her face, and there was blood coming out. There was another time in the months prior to his mother's death, so this would have been roughly in 2017, where he wants to go somewhere, and she doesn't want to take him there. And so he hits her on the face to the point where she does have to have a dental checkup appointment. So those are examples of actual physical fight or assault. And then there's one that involved also a student, so it wasn't just within the family. So at school, there was a particular student. He was angry at him because he was now going out with his ex-girlfriend, and so he initiated a fight with him at the school.
Okay. And how about criteria 5?
Criteria 5 is reckless disregard for the safety of either self or others. So you're having some sort of antisocial act or behavior that could put yourself at harm's way or potentially other people. So one day there was at West Glades, he's 15 years old, a fire alarm drill. And so the record that's described indicates that he was, after the fire drill had kind of calmed down, he is sitting with or standing with peers kind of outside on the side of the road, and then he starts to dart in front of cars laughing. So he's not doing this because he's, quote, lost control. He's doing this because it's kind of reckless, it's entertaining, it may be attention-seeking, because he was noted to be kind of laughing and calm beforehand, and then they had to call him out and try to get him to stop that, which he did. And I'm not sure if we have a clip as well.
We have a clip 16.
shoot stuff in the backyard, in the front yard.
That's what you did. Was that related to,
Yeah,
how so?
for entertainment.
Right, but help me understand that this is...
It's against the law. And that was the thrill of knowing I was against the law.
What was the thrill of doing it? No.
Just shooting a gun in the backyard is against the law.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
And what was thrilling about that?
No one would know. No one could know.
Okay.
Right. And so, a little hard to hear, but what this part is telling is that he's shooting a gun in the backyard. If you're shooting a gun in the backyard, there could potentially be a risk. He knows it's against the law to sell for others, but it's thrilling to him. And one aspect of antisocial personality disorder that's hard for a lot of folks that haven't been around this or don't know this is doing this can be exciting, thrilling, and you feel this thrill of maybe even getting attention for it. So, he said it was thrilling because he knew he was violating the law.
Okay, and criteria number 6?
Criteria number 6 is consistent irresponsibility as indicated by repeated failure to sustain consistent work behavior or honor financial obligations. I did not think he met this criteria. In contrast, he was able, starting roughly in December of 2016, he got a job at Dollar Tree, and a review of his Dollar Tree records indicate that he would typically call in if he thought he was going to be late. He was able to do his work. There weren't problems noted, so he did not meet criterion 6.
Okay, and 7?
7 is a lack of remorse, as indicated by being indifferent to, or rationalizing having hurt, mistreated, or stolen from another. And so I'm going to give some examples prior to the offense. And so some of the examples prior to the offense of a lack of remorse, there was one time, and it's in a posting that he did either on one of the social media or YouTube. He had hit his mother, and he uses a very derogatory phrase, I think we may come up to it later, about how he had hit this woman or just hit her. And that doesn't comport with being remorseful, because in actual fact it almost seemed like he was sort of bragging for it. Likewise, there are multiple examples. I mean, he had Henderson Behavioral Health, Camelot, many people come in and work with the family and work with him, and oftentimes there's some specific notations where he says, well, the mother she needs to handle this better. There was one time when he was counseled about some interactions with some African Americans at, I believe it was Cross Creek. And they were trying to, I think the school was doing their earnest effort to try to negotiate what might have been a misperception or may not have been a slur or not. And his response was, they just need to learn how to cope better. And so that's that kind of lack of remorse. I think that's an example.
Okay. And with antisocial personality disorder, you must have evidence of conduct disorder prior to the age of 15. What does that mean?
So conduct disorder is a disorder that typically happens in youth, usually before the age of 15. Most kids are not going to meet the criteria for conduct disorder, even if they kind of drive you crazy and they do a conduct problem. Then we're going to go through how bad does it have to be to meet the criteria for conduct disorder. All this says is you have to have some evidence that this kind of thinking and problem and way of interacting with society happened before you were 15 years old. So you only need one symptom, really, of conduct disorder, because that's some evidence to meet this part of the antisocial personality disorder criteria.
And did he meet that?
Yes, he met conduct disorder. And so what I'd like to do now is go through the definition of conduct disorder, go through the criteria, and if you were going along with me and kind of counting up how many criteria did he meet for antisocial personality disorder, you should probably have come up with like 6 out of the 7, right? And you only need 3. So even if several are knocked off for whatever reason, he met it. Now we go to conduct disorder. Here's the definition. I'm going to tell you how many you have to meet, and then you can add up and see if he meets them. Remember, for antisocial personality disorder, you only need one criteria. So here's the definition. It's a repetitive and persistent pattern of behavior in which the basic rights of others or major age-appropriate societal norms or rules are violated, as manifested by the presence of at least 3 of the following 15 criteria in the past 12 months from any of the categories below, and you have to have one of the criteria present in the past 6 months. So the first large category is called aggression to people and animals. So under that, there are 7 different examples of being aggressive to people or animals. One example is they often bully, threaten, or intimidate others. So remember, this is prior to the age of 15. So I have to go through the records and find, are there examples prior to 15? I want to give you a few examples. So at age 10, for example, he is in his elementary school class, and he threatened to kill the teacher and an aide, to stab them. The police had to be called. So that's clearly early on, prior to the age of 10. He also was noted to sort of bully. There was a notation in the elementary school records where he used the word effing B word to the teacher. And this progressed over time. Sometimes he might sort out a teacher based on their ethnicity. So he was noted to make sort of Asian slurs against an Asian teacher. That's noted as well. He frequently, in the treatment records when people would come out to the home, was noted to bully, threaten, or intimidate his mother. And this type of sort of threatening other kids at times is also noted in the record. Moving on, the second one is that they often initiate a physical fight. And so he was noted to do this. So one of the counselors, it's from Henderson Behavioral Health, is a woman called Tiffany Forrest. And so Tiffany Forrest goes to try to work, both because she's working with a family and home, but she's also working with a school and working with a mom. So she goes to the school for a school meeting. And at that school meeting, and she documents this in her record, she notes that he oftentimes starts fights or initiates physical fights with other kids. So that certainly would be an example at an early age for him doing so. The third one is, has he used a weapon that can cause serious physical harm to others? And they give some examples of a weapon, but many things can be a weapon. So there was one time he was not happy that his mother wanted him to get off the Xbox. This was a long-standing conflict about how much video time, and that's understandable, but his reaction was he hit her with a vacuum cleaning hose to the point where the police ended up being called. So that's one example. He was noted even in early school, elementary school, to hit a kid with a lunchbox. He was noted to throw a rock at another kid, also in his youth. So there were some examples of using a weapon that could cause harm as well. On the fourth one, it's, has he been physically cruel to people? And again, this is prior to 15. So the notes from West Glades around this time, this is after he turned 15, note that he would maybe purposely stomp or on other kids' feet to go out and hurt them. There was one note even from the first grade that indicated that he hit a first grader, appear in the face, and then kicked him in the groin. So that's also, some transference of pain, if you will. The fifth one is, has he been physically cruel to animals? And this one was robustly met. There were a lot of long-standing and early history of him being cruel to animals. doing different ways to hurt them, torture them, and we might even have a clip where he talks about that.
Okay, it's clip 7, Aaron.
Now, you've told me some different examples of things you've done to animals, different animals. When was the very first time you can remember ever doing something that people might look at and say that's not very kind to an animal? How young were you?
I broke a lizard's back with a rock.
And how old were you?
3.
Okay. And how come you did? What do you remember about doing that?
Something me and my brother did. We went around killing lizards.
Okay. So
Sometimes I
must have
skin them
been-
alive. Sometimes I set them on fire.
Okay, the lizards?
Yeah.
When did you start skinning the lizards alive?
I just taped him to the little table, and I took a knife and I just scraped and
Okay. And
Scrape
about
the skin off.
how old were you the first time you did that, do you think?
4.
Okay. And then what about setting them on fire? How would you do that?
Take a lighter and burn instantly.
How would they react?
Burn instantly.
Will they burn instantly? Do they make any movement or sound or anything?
They start curling up and
Okay.
then just fall over.
So that's at 3, 4. Okay. Tell me what happened next. What's the next progression of that?
Bird eggs.
Bird eggs? What'd you do with bird eggs?
I took them out of the nest and I threw them against the wall
How come?
because I was bored. I wouldn't let me out of the house.
Okay. What did you think was going to happen to the egg if you did that?
It would crack.
Okay. And how old were you with that?
7.
Okay. And then what else? What happened next?
Let's see. Let's see. I set spiders on fire.
Okay. How old were you with that?
Those banana spiders, those big ones.
Are those really big?
Yeah.
Okay.
I set them on fire with a flamethrower.
With a what?
With a spray can.
A spray can.
Okay, and so from that you can make your own assessment about how he felt about that and doing that, or is it kind of more just matter of fact, and as far as how his appearance went.
How about destruction of property?
He did have a good bit of destruction of property, and I'm just double checking. Yep, that's the number 9 criteria, and he met that one. And he, for example, kicked in a door at school when he was less than 15, a glass door, and that, he had a lot of destruction at his home, punched holes in walls, broke a glass door, oftentimes might cut up furniture. So there was a good bit of property destruction in the records.
Okay, and how about 10, 11, 12 deal, Dr. Scott, true with deceitfulness or theft?
Yes, so there are 3 under the category deceitfulness or theft, and so one of them is, has he broken into someone else's house, building a car? I did not find less than 15 he had done that. I did not count that. Does he often lie to obtain goods or favors or to avoid obligations? Less than 15. I found good evidence of that. Even when the mother went and saw Dr. Kravitz, which was one of his earlier psychologists, she noted at an early age that was a problem with him, kind of repeatedly lying. It's also noted in some of the ESE notes from school that he would lie as well. Number 12 is, has he stolen items of non-trivial value without confronting a victim? So this again is that shoplifting, and even less than 15 he had a history of shoplifting and stealing as well.
Okay, and you had a clip of that?
Yes.
Aaron, clip 13, please.
Yeah, I figured out a way how to steal.
Okay.
I didn't want to steal too much because I didn't want to get arrested or go on a blacklist.
Okay.
So usually what I stole was candy, food, magazines, movies, video game controllers.
Okay. Did you ever take any of those things before you were age 15?
Well, I try to.
Okay. Tell me anything you took before or stole, shoplifted before 15.
Movies.
What kind of movies would you steal?
Anything on the market. Anything that I found interesting, like Predator.
Would that be like, was that in the old days when they had like DVDs and stuff? I don't know if they have that so much anymore.
Not anymore. Now you can just go on the internet.
But you would steal some DVDs? At
Yeah.
what age did you start doing that?
12, 13.
Okay. And
I stole, what was it, box of donuts once.
how old were you then?
15.
Okay.
All right, so a couple things about that at the very beginning, I don't know if you caught it, sometimes we can learn a lot from little clips. And so at the very beginning he said, I was careful not to do too much or steal too much because I would get blacklisted, knowing that if he got caught and he had a certain amount, that could get him more trouble. So even at a young age, he had some executive planning and ability to appreciate consequences for his behavior. What would happen if he got caught? How his name could be on a list? And that just sort of slips out when he spontaneously talks.
Okay. And with conduct disorder, what's the modifier of limited pro-social emotion?
Yeah, so there are two kind of important aspects if you're diagnosing conduct disorder. One is it early childhood onset, which is, do they have at least one symptom prior to the age of 10, and he did. And then the other is something known as limited pro-social emotions. It sounds like, what does that even mean? What this means are people who don't think and feel, and these can happen as a very young kid, the way that most other people think and feel. So they may have, for example, a very callous lack of empathy. Did that hurt the person? Did that hurt the animal? Who cares, right? So that's a callousness is a big feature. They typically aren't generally concerned about the performance. They may have sometimes where they were more motivated than others to do well. But one of the things, and I've worked with parents on this, and it's tough if you have a conduct disorder kid, is punishment doesn't work in the same way it does with other kids. They are immune to that. And even standard good therapies, they seem to be resistant with that. And then the third one I'm going to mention is something known as a shallow or deficient affect. What that means is just lack of emotion about how they react to things that most of us might cry about or might affect us. It's just a flatness, it's a shallowness, and that's part of what we call, they're just limited in how they interact socially with other people.
Okay. And that was all that was the basis of your diagnosis of antisocial personality conduct disorder, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So how would you distinguish antisocial personality conduct disorder from other disorders that are listed in the DSM-5?
Yeah, that's so important. It is in the DSM-5, antisocial personality disorder, but antisocial personality disorder, and I kind of read out the general criteria, this is a disorder of how people behave and interact with society. And it's not a disorder where you might have severe psychosis, where you lose touch with reality, where you're not responsible perhaps because maybe you are having a fixed false belief or a delusion, or maybe you're so depressed, or maybe you're fully manic. It separates out, and this is something that the person chooses to do versus they are unable not to do, and that's the difference. So it's a key difference here. Antisocial personality disorder is how they behave and interact with the world around them because that's what they want and that's what they choose.
Okay. And your second diagnosis, Dr. Scott, was borderline personality disorder.
Yes.
What is that?
Borderline personality disorder, I want to make this really clear distinction because I think a couple times I might not have explained it very well. It is not borderline intellectual functioning. It does not mean that you have borderline problems thinking at all. So just take that off the consideration. It again is how a person's personality interacts and relates with the world around them. And you have a series, again, of criteria you have to meet. You have to meet at least 5 of 9 criteria.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry to interrupt. Can we have sidebar, please? Sure. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take about a 15-minute recess. If we can keep it as close to 15 minutes as possible. Please do not discuss the case among yourselves, and please leave your notepads behind. Okay, the jurors have been excused. We're going to be in recess for 15 minutes. Dr. Scott, if you would like to take a break, you may. Just please don't discuss your testimony with anyone. Also, just for everyone's information, the courthouse...
When was the very first time you can remember ever doing something that people might look at and say that's not very kind to an animal? How young were you?
I broke a lizard's back with a rock.
And how old were you?
3.
Okay. And how come you did? What do you remember about doing that?
Something me and my brother did. We went around killing lizards.
Okay. So
Sometimes I skin them alive. Sometimes I set them on fire.
Okay, the lizards?
Yeah.
When did you start skinning the lizards alive?
I just taped him to the little table, and I took a knife and I just scraped and
Okay. And
scraped
about
the skin off.
how old were you the first time you did that, do you think?
4.
Okay. And then what about setting them on fire? How would you do that?
Take a lighter. They burn instantly.
How would they react?
Burn instantly.
Will they burn instantly? Do they make any movement or sound or anything?
They start curling up, and
Okay.
then just follow.
You may be seated. State whenever you're ready. You may continue.
Thank you, Your Honor. Dr. Scott, I think we left off with you were going to describe, what borderline personality is.
Right. So just to briefly reiterate, again, it's not that you have a borderline intellectual functioning. It is how you interact with the world. And there's some different characteristics of this disorder compared to antisocial personality disorder. So let me give you the overarching definition. It's a pervasive pattern of instability, of interpersonal relationships, self-image, and affects. That's kind of how you react to things. And marked impulsivity, beginning by early adulthood and present in a variety of contexts. And you have to have 5 or more of 9 different symptoms. So I'll read them out to you, and then I'll tell you why I think he met certain ones of those. Okay? The first one is frantic efforts to avoid real or imagined abandonment. And so when you look at some of the Henderson behavioral health records and other notes, if Nikolas had a breakup with a girlfriend when he was about 16, and so this was very leaving, the separation was very upsetting to him, and so it was sort of this abandonment issue that came up. And watching Dr. Denny's interview, who's a neuropsychologist that evaluated him, he did talk about that sometimes he might just stay by himself because he didn't like being rejected. So these folks can be really super rejection sensitive, but once they're in a relationship, they kind of will cling on to it kind of in a panicky kind of way, and they may have that kind of fear of the person abandoning them. I thought he meant that one. The second one is a pattern of unstable and intense interpersonal relationships characterized by alternating between extremes of idealization and devaluation. What does that mean? What that means is, at one point, I'm like, oh my God, I love you, you're the best thing, no one's like that, that's cool. But then something goes wrong, and then you flip 100% to you're terrible, you're evil, I can't stand you. Again, a girlfriend that he had, he broke up with her, and although he would say he idealized her or loved her, or she was the love of his life initially, if you read some of the comments he's told other examiners about her, some of the phrases, I won't mention them, but that is that kind of devaluation, and it's all good or bad. You split the person, and you end up loving them. We're all human, we all have faults, but there's no forgiveness for that. It can flip to a bad devaluation of the person. The third is identity disturbance. This is a markedly and persistent, unstable self-image and sense of self. So how does the person kind of view how they look, how they appear? Do they have sort of, what's my identity? These kind of thoughts. And he did search out questions to try to answer that when you go through some of his internet searches. So he would search out kind of questioning, who am I, certain aspects of why do I feel this way. So that's noted in the records and in his internet searches as well. And he does have body conscious issues and images about his sense of self and how he might be perceived by others. So I thought he met that criteria. Impulsivity in at least two areas that are potentially self-damaging. And you can have a range of different criteria if you say, well, they're impulsive and it can hurt them. So drugs and alcohol would be an example under this category. So he did have use of marijuana and Xanax, at times alcohol, and he described to me in my interview that worsened certain of his symptoms and how he felt. So that would be an example. I've already given the example of when he was kind of very impulsive, hit the safe, broke his hand. That's an impulsive behavior that's self-damaging, and there can be some other examples for him as well. Number 5, recurrent suicidal behavior, gestures, or threats, or some type of self-mutilating behavior. Now here, this is an interesting one in this category because a person can maybe superficially scratch themselves either on their arm, their leg is common, thigh is common, and it's not really for the intent to die. Some people will express to you it helps relieve the pain, or it may, I concentrate on that versus other things, but they aren't intending to kill themselves, but they'll make these statements or gestures. So there was, at one point, there was a threat assessment when he was about, it was in 2016 at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, and it got triggered because a peer at the school, he had commented either on Snapchat or some other social media that he might have cut himself or that he might have consumed gas, drank gasoline, this type of thing, when in reality, if you're drinking gasoline, that would cause serious medical problems. So, but there was some sort of gesture. He was evaluated by multiple folks, different agencies, and then he said, no, I really didn't do that. So it either can be for attention or it's a gesture, but it's not with the intent, typically to die. And affective instability, this means you have a marked change in mood. So you can have really intense dysphoria. It can be brief, usually last a few hours. So for example, when he would feel depressed or be upset about something, he would have these thoughts that he would want to go out and kill, usually animals, to help relieve that stress, that dysphoria. So these thoughts of killing would come to his mind as part of that instability. 7 is chronic feelings of emptiness. So this is chronically feeling lonely. He told there was a Henderson behavioral health therapist, Jared Benefield, and he said, yeah, I kind of feel lonely. He's described that to other folks, and just kind of feeling chronically empty. And then 8 is inappropriate, intense anger or difficulty controlling the anger. So you can have frequent temper, constant anger, recurrent physical fights. I've given you several examples of that, but if some of the other examples, if you read his Instagram post, or I read the Instagram post, and I can just sum them up, and some of the things that he said to some of his peers and communicated the anger in the way that he did was extreme, inappropriate, intense anger, and I think he meets that criteria. The last one, which I do not think he met as far as how the manual suggests, is transient, what we call stress-related paranoid ideation or severe dissociative symptoms. What does dissociative symptom mean? It means that you lose touch with reality or your context of your environment in some way. So sometimes people think of like, ooh, multiple personality disorder, kind of in the movies and the lay press. That would be kind of a huge extreme example, but there was not evidence that he's dissociated, lost touch with the world around him, and so I did not think he met that criteria.
Okay, so why is borderline personality applicable in this case, Dr. Scott?
Well, it's applicable in this case for a couple reasons. One, he meets the criteria. 2, that combination with the antisocial personality disorder, if you're trying to understand, why did he do this? People can wonder, people just don't do this. Why did he do this on that day? And a lot of characteristics of that borderline, remember again, it's not like a psychotic disorder or a mood disorder, are intense anger. When you feel maybe that you've been not respected, you've not been treated well, and that antisocial then personality disorder fuels the fire also that, well, this is how we're going to take care of this. This is how I'm going to do business. And so I think those two go hand in hand. Okay.
And the third thing you mentioned is malingering. What is malingering?
Yeah, so malingering we've covered, kind of to paraphrase it a little bit, but it is the gross exaggeration or faking of physical or psychological symptoms for the purpose of a secondary gain, which is a reason. So it could be, to get out of trouble, to get out of the military, to get into the hospital if you want a place to stay. There can be a lot of reasons a person may malinger. In forensics, almost pretty much every case I can think about, certainly one like this, if you're a good forensic evaluator and you're going to make an opinion about whether someone's underlying disorder did or did not cause them to commit murders, you have to do an evaluation of malingering, particularly in certainly a case like this. And it is a really significant part of forensic evaluation.
Okay, and is malingering actually defined in the DSM-5 TR?
It is. It is included in a section called Other Focus of Clinical Attention. So it's not a mental disorder. So just because someone may make up something or fake something, it doesn't mean they're mentally ill, but it is included in the manual, so it's not a mental disorder, so that we have a way to say, this person doesn't have a mental disorder, they're faking it. And so that's why it's in the manual.
Okay. And Dr. Scott, you evaluated the defendant, Nikolas Cruz, for 3 days in this case, correct?
Yes.
At any time, did you feel that he was trying to manipulate you?
Well, certainly there were times during the evaluation where on the clinical part of the interview, I felt he was reporting kind of extreme mental health symptoms that were highly atypical, extreme physical symptoms that were highly atypical and not supported by the records. So if someone says, I've done X, Y, and Z, and I'm doing this, since I was a kid, and you have all the records and none of that happened, that's an example of malingering or manipulation in some way. Yes, so I did think so.
Okay, and did you find any evidence of malingering?
Yes, there was robust evidence that he was malingering during my examination, but also during Dr. Denny's examination.
Okay. What is the significance of the Yale, like Yale University, Brown, like Brown University, obsessive compulsive score?
Right. So I had gone through the mental health records, and one of the diagnoses, at least recorded in the record, he had been recorded with a diagnosis called attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, kind of summed up as ADHD. But one record also noted that he might have something called OCD, which stands for obsessive compulsive disorder. So if you've ever watched the show Hoarders, that would be an example kind of huge collection that's kind of under that category. These people may have real difficulties with a range of things. So they have to count every crack. They have to do the light switch 4 times or they can't leave. They have to, it's really kind of a thought that's intrusive. A behavior may be associated with it. So I thought, well, I see this is listed in the record. I never saw any of the true signs and symptoms of that. Where I think that came up is there were times he would ask his mother repeatedly to use the Xbox, kind of in obsessive way. But that's not the same thing. Can I play the Xbox? Can I play the Xbox? That doesn't mean you have a mental disorder in and of itself. So I gave him the structured interview. It's not like a psychological test that comes out with a score, but it lists a range of different possible obsessions and possible compulsions, like every possible one you can almost think of, to make sure you're being thorough.
Okay. And what did that tell you?
He endorsed an extremely high number as present, when in reality the records did not support that at all, not the ways he was describing.
And the significance of that?
That would be consistent with malingering OCD or that psychiatric symptom.
Okay. And how about, what's the significance of the trauma symptom inventory too that you
so the trauma symptom inventory, I administered it. Dr. Denny ultimately scored it, but I'm familiar with the instrument. I know the interpretation. This is an instrument that does have what we call validity scales. That's a term you're going to hear a lot about probably in the next couple days. So what a validity scale means and why it can be important in a test is the person presenting their symptoms in a truthful, valid manner or not? And so some tests don't have validity scales. You can't see if the report is valid or not. So if I opened up my DSM and I went around to the jury and asked you, do you have this symptom, this symptom, this symptom, and you answer everyone yes, you're just answering yes, but I don't have a scale to see if you're answering it honestly or not. So validity scales and certain instruments help explain that to the evaluator, all right? So for the TSI-2, it stands for Trauma Symptom Inventory 2, he has to go through and answer a lot of symptoms that may be related if he had prior history of trauma. And so I administered it, and the scoring came out that he over-endorsed so many symptoms. Over-endorsed means he reported symptoms that are highly unusual to have that many by any one person, and so the scoring came out that it was atypical. So atypical reporting of symptoms, way too many, so it cast concern about him reporting kind of traumatic symptoms honestly. And so that would be another piece of evidence suggesting malingering or faking as well.
Okay, and how about the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory, better known as the MMPI-3?
Yeah, so there's another self-report inventory. It helps measure kind of personality features and has many clinical scales on it. There's a third version out. I administered it. Dr. Denny, who is the neuropsychologist, did the final scoring, but I'm aware of the scoring and reviewed the scoring. This too has validity scales in it. This is why this instrument is very important in doing a forensic evaluation. And let me tell you a little bit about some of these validity scales in this. So they have scales. One's called the F scale, and it's looking at, stands for the infrequency scale, how many kind of symptoms is a person reporting that are really kind of infrequent out there, right, in general. There's another scale called the FP scale, and that's looking at, are they reporting symptoms that even people in an inpatient unit, an inpatient psychiatry unit, would not endorse or would be extreme or highly unlikely. So now we're comparing him to the most severe psychiatric populations that have been tested in the country. You have to understand, I was in a room with him for 21 hours, so I can observe how does he present versus how does he answer on the testing. And although I'm a physician, we don't have a blood test for lying, but the MMPI is as pretty much close as you get. He scored extremely high on those validity scales, indicating that he was over-endorsing mental health symptoms, which really raised the question about the symptoms that he presented.
Okay. And how about the personality assessment inventory, or the PAI?
Yeah, the PAI is similar in some ways to the MMPI in that it has validity scales. It's looking at people over-reporting or not. And Dr. Denny's interpretation of that was that it also was highly atypical and over-reporting.
And how about the clinical assessment of attention, the CAT-A?
Yeah, so this one was interesting because one of the questions that has come up, and I thought a fair look needed to be done into it, was this issue of ability to concentrate, to attend. He was diagnosed with ADHD, attention deficit disorder, from a young age. And he may or may not have some, lingering symptoms over time of that. So this is another self-report where they have given it to people with legitimate ADHD, confirmed, not in the midst of a legal case or trial, where they'd have no reason to amp up their symptoms. So we know what a large, database looks like, and then you can compare his response. And again, his response was extremely high, highly unusual. Dr. Denny, I believe's interpretation of it was that it was consistent with malingering and exaggerated. Okay.
And did you have an opportunity to review the SIMS, which is the structured inventory of malingered symptomatology?
Symptomatology, it's a hard one. Anyway, so yes, so the SIMS is 75 true-false questions. And again, this one has 5 different subscales on it. And so it can be useful because rather than just looking, are they over-reporting a false belief or some other unusual symptom, we can now break it into different categories. So some of the scales on these are like amnesia, low intelligence, maybe a learning impairment, psychosis, or affective, also known as a mood disorder. And so the cutoff score to suggest that they may be malingering, and you want to look at other testing to see if it coincides with that, and we have a lot of other testing looking at that. The cutoff score is greater than 14. He scored a 31, twice the cutoff score, extremely high. He also scored on every single subscale, including like the amnesia, which means I have problems remembering, or I don't remember this and that. He also scored over the cutoff on that subscale as well.
Okay, and I think there was a clip with reference to the boot and the gun.
Yeah, so one of the things that you can malinger in different ways, and one human being can also malinger in different ways. So let me tell you kind of like the 2 main categories. So one category of malingering is presenting lots of terrible symptoms that you may have, all right? And so he did that on a lot of the testing. Another way of faking is kind of faking good. So it would be not taking responsibility and saying, oh no, that wasn't my problem. I didn't do that, so you're malingering well. You're trying to fake and present what we call a positive impression. You're trying to create, I love this term, it's called impression management. You're trying to manage the people around you by putting yourself in a positive light and manage them. So this clip, we're talking about a swastika that was placed and it was into evidence, it was related to the offense. There's a swastika on the boot, there's a swastika on one of the magazines. So I'm asking him about where did the swastika come from, what does it mean, who put it on there. Now, I've read depositions of other individuals who they've testified they did not put the swastika on the gun or the boot. And then I'm going to ask him, how did this come from? You'll see what he acknowledges, but you'll also see how he, and you can judge, what answer does he give you when I say, what is the swastika, what did it mean to you? You know, you went into the school, it's on your gun, it's on your boot. On the day that you killed 17 people and shot 17 others, what was the purpose of the swastika? And I think the clip will speak for itself.
Yeah. Clip 4, please, Aaron.
And any time where someone might have thought you were carving like a swastika on a table or something like that?
My friends told me to do that, and they did it as well. And I did that for attention. And anything that I drew swastika or said nasty remarks about the race or gender equality or anything like that was all for attention.
Okay.
And that magazine, I'm sure you know about it. It was like I had a magazine with a swastika on it for my AR.
Yeah.
I didn't write that at all.
Where'd that come from?
Jameson Todd asked me if he wanted to draw a swastika on it. And so I said, sure.
Okay, so he
I didn't
drew,
think any of it.
so he drew the swastika on the magazine?
Yeah. We were just chilling out. He said, it's cool if I draw a swastika on your mag. I said, sure.
Okay. And was that magazine used on the day of the offense?
Yeah.
Okay. Was it left there like at the scene?
I believe so, yeah.
Okay.
And then someone told me I had a swastika on my boot. I did do that, but that was for attention.
Okay. When did you put the swastika on the boot?
Probably a month before, half a month before.
Okay. And what kind of attention can you get from having a swastika on you?
Negative or positive. It can be used in either way because the swastika was used in Native American as a peace symbol. And then when the Germans saw, I guess they took it up themselves and they made it into a symbolic symbol, which was really stupid because it was a Native American peace symbol.
Okay. But when you would put on your shoe for attention, which of those two was it most likely to kind of connect to or represent?
Mostly peace.
Okay.
All right, so his presentation, and there's a history of him with a swastika on the book bag, with a FN word. There's searches prior to this crime on the internet related to a range of things related to swastika. And in the course of my interview, although the swastika was on the magazine and the boot at the time he killed 17 people, he said it was there for the intent of peace. And so sometimes that just doesn't sort of seem, in my opinion, consistent with what the record showed.
Okay. And did you make any other observations during your evaluation, Dr. Scott, that were inconsistent with the psychological and neurological testing?
Yes. So prior to interviewing Mr. Cruz, I had read a good bit of evaluation material. I did have access to a good bit of the defense testing as well. And so it was unclear to me how he might present intellectually based on kind of what was written. And so I wondered, could he even read? How did he read? What was his actual level of functioning? So I did start off fairly basic to try to assess that, and then as the interview went, I was with him for almost 21 hours, I came to learn more about how he thought, and I think some of the clips describe that.
Yes. Aaron, clip 5B, please.
Okay, I'll fill it. So before you do that, I'm just going to check your reading, okay, a little bit. Do you like reading, Nick? Okay. And so I'm going to ask you to read out a few things out loud. You can give me the pen back for now. And I just want to make sure you can read all these questions okay, all right? So I'm just checking out your reading. So let's see. I don't know if you like African animals or anything like that, but this is a book.
I like it.
This is a book on, let's see if I can find one that might be interesting to you.
Anything really.
Do you like reading, or do you like animals, or what's?
I like animals.
Okay, let's do this one. I just want to have you read out a little bit for me. Here we go.
Yeah.
You might need your glasses because
You need me to take off my mask or anything?
No.
Okay.
So just start kind of here and read the first couple paragraphs for me.
I got it. Indeed, when it comes to the question of which land animal is fastest, the cheetah wins paws down. It relies on its record-setting speed to chase down prey. Unlike other cats, the cheetah usually hunts during the day. Cat does its best to get within 150 feet of its potential of prey, which is less than half the length of an American football field, and then quickly revs up to a sprint. If the cheetah succeeds in bringing down its target, it clamps its jaws down on the animal's throat, cutting it off its air supply. Before digging in, the cat usually moves its meal to an area by a tree.
Okay, you're doing fine, yeah. I just wanted to make sure that if I gave you this questionnaire, you could read all the questions, but I'm confident you can. So,
Okay, so the point of that was, before I can administer some of the questionnaires, I have to make sure he can read at a certain level. It wouldn't be fair if you just hand them a questionnaire and then it could be like random scoring or stuff. So that book is at the appropriate age level where he could do, the testing that followed. So I did the testing after. And so that's not like extremely high level reading. I'm not trying to suggest that it is, but it's at least at like the beginning junior high kind of level, and he did fine with it. So it was fine for him to do all the testing questions.
Okay, and then there came a time you were discussing chess, correct?
Yes, so at some point he mentioned that he had become familiar with chess. He described that he wasn't necessarily a great player. What I was really interested in was, because sometimes people may boast about things and maybe they can't do it, right? And so I wanted to see if he could name the chess pieces and name the moves, which is more than a lot of folks in the general population are aware of or could do.
Okay. Aaron, 6B2, please.
any other counselings that you can remember? You talked about Jared. Any
Yeah,
other?
there was like a woman that wanted me to get into chess. And she also wanted me to try to punch a pillow, see if that would help relieve any stress.
Right.
There was also...
And did you end up playing chess?
No.
Yeah, or can you play chess?
It wasn't my interest. I didn't even play it right. I've only learned that I was playing wrong throughout my years.
Okay. And can you play chess now?
I'm not very good at it.
Yeah. Tell me what you remember about some of the different names of the chess pieces. What are some of the names?
Oh, we got the rook, we got the king, the queen, the knights. Oh, the other one. I forgot whether bishop.
Okay.
And the pawns.
Okay. That sounds like all of them. And do they move in different ways?
Yeah, they move in different ways.
Okay.
The knight goes like in like an L form.
Okay.
The king goes pretty much anywhere, but only one spot at a time. The queen can go anywhere on the chessboard. I think the bishop goes sideways, and then the rooks just go up or left and right.
Okay.
I think that's about it.
Do they allow you to play chess in here at all?
Yeah.
And who do you get to play chess with?
My sight doctor.
Okay. And are you able to? How do you do?
Terrible.
Terrible.
I think he's cheating somehow.
How do you mean?
Huh? He always uses his queen.
He always uses his queen?
Yeah, he always uses his queen.
What does that mean? I don't play chess, so...
So the queen is probably the most powerful piece on the board, so he uses that a lot, and he always gets me with it.
Okay.
And then we play Uno, and I usually crack up jokes with him. It's pretty fun.
Okay. And which doctor is this? What's his name?
Dr. K.
How do you spell last name? K, you said?
Yeah, I call him Dr. K. I can't pronounce his full name.
Okay. Is he a treating doctor here?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, so what do we learn from that? Maybe he's not the greatest player, I don't know. But what he can do is he can remember the names of pieces, he remembers them accurately, he can remember the moves. He even said at the end, the queen is very powerful and he uses the queen. So there was at least an understanding of basic moves, basic memory of those. So he can, the three things that you have to have for a memory. And if he's described as having a memory impairment, we look at those in different ways outside of the testing. A person can do bad on testing, but in reality can do good in life. So can he observe? That's number one. Where you observe something, can you store it? That's number two. Number three is can you recall it? So this taught me that he has all three stages, at least that aspect of memory: observe, store, recall. And then it even had kind of more of an abstractive ability, which is sort of understanding the different moves and maybe some of the strategy.
Okay. And then there was the Zimbardo study. What's that?
Yeah, so there was, and I don't know if any of you ever took 101 psychology in college or maybe in grad school, but there's a really famous, interesting study, and I think it was in my Psych 101, and the premise of the study was sometimes called the Stanford study, I think, where you have like half the class or the people that are in the study, they're said, hey, you're going to be an inmate in this study. And the other half are said, hey, you're going to be a correctional officer in this study. And so they're separated, and there might be like a wall between them. I'm kind of simplifying it. And you don't see, if you're the correctional officer in the study, you're not a real correctional officer, but you know what I mean, you're role playing. And so you're told, okay, you can dial up a certain amount of pain, and other people will feel this, and somehow there's an incentive for doing that or not. And then at what level will people placed in a position of authority dial up the pain? And then and it's high, by the way, if there's something associated with that. And then they reversed it. And so the people who had been the inmates in the study then become the correctional officers. And then they see, well, they do the same, and they do. And so this, he mentions this. He may get some of the wording a little wrong, but it's a high concept to appreciate that this is a study examining how authority in certain situations can corrupt. So you wouldn't expect someone that didn't have an abstractive ability, reasoning, significantly impaired functioning, to kind of understand that complexity. It's oftentimes taught at like even a college level.
Okay, and that's to be Aaron, please.
Did you ever take any kind of psychology or psych 101?
Oh yeah, I did take psychology. I actually scored pretty well.
Okay.
And I passed the test too.
Okay. And that was at the Dave Thomas campus?
OCLC.
OCLC.
Yep.
And so
The only
OCLC...
class I actually passed any.
Okay. What kind of things did they teach in the psychology class?
Well, they didn't teach anything. It was just basically we were just doing things on computer.
Yeah, what kind of topics on the computer were there?
People with mental health, past tests, such as the one where they practiced this test on prisoners and guards.
Uh-huh.
So basically what happened was there was this test back in, I think, the 80s or 60s, and they had like a bunch of inmates become security guards, and security guards become the inmates. And it didn't turn out well, actually. The security guards turned against the inmates and treated them horribly, which came up with a theory that if you put someone in a situation and under certain circumstances, they'll abuse that power.
Yeah, it's a famous study, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that is the key point. Like if I had a college student write that answer for what was the meaning of that study, that would get credit for it. That's exactly what it meant. So it showed he had that reasoning ability.
Okay. And about, memory recall.
Well, there were his memory recall in many different ways was demonstrated during the exam. So it's interesting dichotomy because, and I watched this with Dr. Denny's eval, happened to me at some points during mine, you ask them a question, oh, I have a terrible memory, I really can't recall. And so I reflected on that because I'd seen that some of the testing results also suggested that he may have some impairments in memory. So there were situations that came up during the interview that actually showed me he has a really good memory.
Okay, Aaron, would you please play 1B?
What kind of books are you reading now?
I have a book of maps. I'm trying to figure out what's happening in Ukraine. They're attacking on fort sides, the Russians.
Yeah, and so it sounds like you're able to get some news while you're in here.
Terrible news.
Yeah, and so you have a map, and you even sort of heard on the news about.
They're getting close to the capital of Ukraine, Kyiv.
Yeah, tell me what you've learned on the news about what's happening with this.
Well, so far I heard that Putin ordered a missile strike near the capital.
Okay.
Killed 10 people.
Okay. Anything else you've learned?
I learned that the UN and all the other countries are afraid that if they cut Putin in the back corner, he might release nuclear weapons.
Okay. And from what you've learned about your history and you have this map book.
I actually know a lot about him, actually. He did judo. He had trouble in school.
This is Putin we're talking about?
Yeah, he actually told the newscast that he couldn't go into the KGB. They had to find him. He couldn't find them. Like, he had to go through this whole process in order to go there.
Yeah. How'd you learn all this?
They had a book on a book card about him.
Oh, okay. On the book card here?
Yeah, his father served in World War II. Before that, he had a grandfather who served in World War I. Or a godfather, I don't know. I can't remember. His mother lived in St. Petersburg, Russia. When the war came, his father almost got captured. He managed to escape and make it back to the borderline with Russia, but Stalin ordered him to go back to the front line, so that's what he did. He got injured, and then he worked on the farm for the rest of his life until his mother gave birth to him. He has 2 daughters. He got married, I think it's 1969.
This is Putin we're talking about?
Yeah, he had a tough life.
Okay.
Yeah, his first wife he wanted to get married at a young age, but he didn't. He kind of regretted, but tries not to think about it. He didn't really talk about it too much, his relationship, but he had a hard life. When the USSR was falling, he was in East Germany. He was behind backwork as a KGB agent. He was pretty much getting information from back from the States in Russia, USSR. But no one was really following any orders by the time the fall of the Berlin Wall was happening. Actually, where he was working, all the mobs from East Germany went into the building, tried to figure out who was KGB or not. Okay. And he managed to escape. He managed to get some guards, and he went back to Russia, where he worked his way up to becoming president of Russia.
Okay. And from your reading and knowledge, how do you think things are going to turn out?
I'm hoping maybe he does the right decision and calls for a ceasefire, and that he apologizes to the Ukrainian government and offers them assistance in rebuilding the country.
Okay.
That's probably his best option.
Okay. From what you read about him, what do you think the likelihood is he'll take that option?
I think he'll figure something out.
Okay.
That's just me, my personal opinion. He might cause for a ceasefire.
Okay.
I hope so. That's what I'm hoping, maybe within a year or so. I don't think he's going to capture him by the end of the week. Ukraine? No, I don't think he is.
Okay, so really several important things about that clip. You may think it's just to talk about Putin, but it's not. It's a big important part of, or an important part of the evaluation. One, and something I haven't mentioned, and so I'm at fault for that, is one of the things that we look at if someone has a pervasive developmental disorder or a neurodevelopmental disorder, particularly in the category of autism, is there's both verbal things you look at as far as how they communicate and nonverbal. So one of the nonverbals that you're looking at is, does the person make eye contact? Another is, I kind of overdo it, but do they use their hands in an expressive way or not? And so if you see future clips of that, and here it was he oftentimes uses his hands, he's describing things, so this is not characteristic of autism. It is not characteristic of pervasive developmental disorder. He is communicating, he's making eye contact, he's describing. So I just wanted to make sure you learned that from that clip. The other thing is he read a book about Putin, and that was an impressive amount of information. I certainly didn't know that much about Putin. There was a lot of information that came out from that, and he did make a couple of errors. I think he got the wedding date wrong or the wedding year wrong on that, and maybe a few other, maybe one other, not exactly on target, but that was a tremendous amount of detail. So this takes it to a different level. It's not just that he can read the book, like when he read the book about the cheetah. He can read a higher level book on a complicated, issue and remember it later and then recall accurately a lot of the facts. The third point I wanted to bring out about this clip is when we talk about abstraction, some people test abstraction by saying, how did they do in a proverb? So you give them a proverb. What does it mean when people say, don't cry over spilled milk? And if they don't do well on that, then you say, oh, they can't interpret. Their brain may be somewhat restricted. Another way to look at abstraction, though, is from the knowledge you've learned about Putin or about whatever you've learned in life, how do you apply that in a reasoning manner that indicates you can abstract? Towards the end, and remember, my interview was on March the 1st, so this was either on March 1st, 2nd, or 3rd. I don't remember which day this came from. But the invasion had only been about 6 days prior. So he got a lot of projection about what he thought the anticipated outcomes would be. It's not going to happen, in 6 months, a year. He's right. I hope he doesn't threaten nuclear. He's right. He may have to find a way out. He's right, if he can. So a lot of application of real life learning and reasoning in that clip.
Okay. And there was also, did you use some memory recall for abstract reasoning?
Yes, and so that helped describe it as well.
Okay. Clip 3B, please, Aaron.
So tell me about that. You mentioned that earlier this morning.
So in order to go in the military and get a good job in the military, you have to score high on the ASVAB first. The ASVAB is a crazy test.
Tell me about some of the questions and what it was like. Best you remember.
Here, I can write down some.
Okay. Let me take out this piece of paper. I've never taken it, so I don't...
It's crazy tough.
Okay, give me some examples.
Okay. I didn't even do too well, so see, that's good. Try to come up with a question I could... Let's see. Something like that, like tough, really tough questions.
Let me see what you wrote here.
Those are just like small examples. It gets really, really complicated and tough.
So what is a H2O molecule? What's this right here?
All right, let me see. What is H2? What is a H2O molecule of water?
Of water. And what would your answer be to something like that?
Hydrogen, and what was the other one? Helium, I believe.
Okay, and then what does this say?
Who was Josephine during the French Revolution?
And what's the answer to that?
It was Napoleon's ex-wife.
And then this last one?
What's the square root of 256?
And what's an answer to that?
I don't know.
Okay.
Made up.
But would these be questions, are these exact questions from that test or just similar to what?
Those are simple questions. I can't put in,
Okay.
give you one. It gets really complicated.
So,
Okay, so couple things. I was in the military, so there is a test that you can give called the ASVAB. I may be getting it wrong, but you know what I'm talking about. And he did poorly on that in reality when he took it in roughly the 10th grade at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas. And so, and that's documented. What I'm asking here, though, is something different. This is a person that I might have had the impression couldn't maybe read that great, or couldn't remember things, couldn't come up with an abstractive way to think about the world. And so I'm asking him about this test, and he volunteers to write the questions. I don't lead him. I don't ask him to do that. Important for a couple of reasons. One, again, autistic people, and I've worked in autism clinic at the University of California, San Francisco. He is initiating the interaction there. He's making eye contact. He reaches over. He has the behavior.
Sir, could you slow down a little bit?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
No, sorry. So he has the behavior that indicates that he's engaged and interactive. He then, out of his own mind, comes up with 3 separate questions. And the first one is, it's a science question, what is the H2O molecule of water? Well, that tells me that he does remember that H2O is the chemical symbol for water. He goes on to say it's either helium or hydrogen, so it shows a little bit more knowledge about the periodic table, even if he doesn't get every other aspect of the molecule of water. Number 2 is, who is Josephine related to the French Revolution? So now he's come up randomly with a history question, and then he answers it. And then the third one is a math question. So he's writing a sample screening academic test. And he has the square root, and the number that he chose, although he said he didn't know the answer, if you do the math on it, it actually is one of those that's a perfect. If you have a square root, it comes out with an actual number. So the odds of that, I guess it could happen, but it would be pretty unlikely. So this is multi-step thinking. I'm going to create a test. I'm going to think of 3 questions that I know the answers to and show them back to you out of his knowledge.
Okay. And then there was another clip about the description of an AR-15. Why was that significant?
Right. So part of this crime actually involved an AR-15. And so to what degree did he understand what an automatic weapon was, what an automatic weapon could do, and or was it just something that was beyond his control and he didn't? So I think that this clip helps illustrate his knowledge of the gun.
Okay. Aaron, clip 3, please.
Describe to me what, if someone knew nothing about guns, how would you explain to them what an AR-15 is?
An AR-15 is a long rifle, and it's used as a sporting rifle. It shoots in semi-automatic fire, and then there's fully automatic fire. Fully automatic fire is only meant for the military. No legal person is allowed to get it unless they have a firearms license or something like that in the state of Florida.
All right, and so, again, what's the difference between, for a complete novice, between a semi-automatic and a full automatic?
Fully automatic is continuous fire.
Okay.
And semi-automatic is single fire. So every time you pull the trigger, you only pull once.
Okay, so does that mean you have to pull for each time you fire it, or does it do it on its own?
So like that.
Okay.
While in fully automatic, you just hold on as long as possible until the rounds are completely empty.
Okay.
Okay, and so he has a good bit of detailed knowledge about the AR-15. There are other parts of my interview where he discusses this weapon in more detail. He also acknowledges that each click of the trigger is a voluntary, you have to do it. You have to click it yourself. It doesn't just start shooting people on its own. So every click of that automatic weapon was automatic from his finger, but not from a mechanic of a gun. It's something he did.
Okay. And then you did something with visual spatial? The marksmanship?
Yes. So one of the other real-life practical areas you might want to examine are both hand-eye motor coordination and perhaps visual spatial relationships related to that. So he was in JROTC, and he did join, it was on their marksmanship team, and so it is an aspect of measuring how good he is with aiming, with hand-eye coordination, and I thought this clip summarized that.
Hearing 7B, please.
I think 10th, partially 10th.
You're right,
Yeah.
okay. So you went there, and how many people were in your class?
30 people at a time.
30 per class, and if you...
In JRTC in the morning, so we have different names for morning sessions in JRTC. The morning session I was in first year was really short. There was not that many kids, so we had a chance to speak, get to know one another, build up our confidence with each other.
Okay, so was your JROTC, was that your first class of the day?
Yeah.
And that's when you went, and I just want to make sure I got the years right, because you left there roughly when you hadn't quite finished the 11th grade, is that right?
I think so, yeah.
And then
I was doing really well in that class.
in the JRTC?
Yeah.
So let's talk about that. Who was your teacher?
John DeMauro,
Okay, and I've never been in a
Sergeant John DeMauro.
in a JRTC class. So
Okay.
tell me what happens in a JRTC class.
JRTC is the short-term definition of JRTC is Junior Officer Training Corps.
Okay.
It's supposed to make you ready to go in the military, because that's what I wanted. I wanted to seek a military career in the K-9 unit, if not K-9 unit, then Army Ranger School. So I was trying to learn everything I can about the military. So the first step was to go into JRTC, take a class on marksmanship, because I wanted to experience that, just to get an idea of what it's like. And I learned a lot.
Okay, tell me what you learned about marksmanship.
I learned how to shoot a gun. I learned how to zero in a rifle.
What does zero in a rifle mean? I don't know what that means.
It means to shoot dead center or shoot on impact, where you want to shoot your target. Like, see that bottle?
Yeah.
If you wanted to shoot the top of that, you're supposed to zero it in, so you keep shooting it until you're able to get the cap off or something like that. And that's when you're ready.
Okay, what type of training, gun or whatever, did they use?
We didn't do anything that you see on TV.
No?
No. What we did was we sat on a platform, like a little green thing, and then we set up our rifles. We put on these little things around our arms, and we had some sort of air pellet gun, which I think functioned on CO2 gas. So we had cylinders in it. So you pull back the thing, and then you're supposed to put it in the thing, and then you're supposed to let go. And then you look, and it's supposed to hit the target about 10 meters. So we set up these targets 10 meters. And there's prone, kneeling, and then standing.
Okay.
And
Three different positions you have to learn?
3 positions, yeah. For that particular
How did they determine if you were good or not?
you have to shoot a target at 10 meters the size of a dime or a quarter.
Okay.
It actually decreased in size over the years. I don't know if I heard it's a penny now.
Okay. So overall, how did you do as a mark in that class or in that JROTC? Were you
Well,
a
I
good
was in
shot?
the top. I was in the top one. I was probably the third or fourth one from being top in the class.
Okay.
The females are a lot better at shooting than men.
And that's because?
They're just better shooters.
Okay.
Even the Marines did their own study on that. It's true. Women are better shooters than men.
Okay. And so, anything else you learned in that class?
I learned leadership skills. I learned
Give me some examples, some leadership skills.
whenever someone's in need, you're supposed to go up to them and make sure they're all right. If someone were to challenge you in a fight, you're supposed to walk away from it. If you're marching and someone falls down, you're supposed to help them up. And if someone's having issues with some sort of class, you're supposed to help them out.
Okay.
You're supposed to stick up for one another. That's what theirs is about.
Okay.
All right. Couple things important about that clip. One of them I think stands out pretty clearly, and that is he understands about sighting a weapon, aiming a weapon, he can do fairly well, hit a target, and so that's a skill that he had and knowledge that he had prior to February 14th. The other thing is kind of at the end, and maybe it's subtle, maybe it's not, but when he talks about the leadership skills that he had learned, these are coping skills and things, how you handle a situation that he was aware of, had learned in class prior to February the 14th, 2018. So you help someone up if they fall down. You walk away if there's a bad sort of incident. So it's not that he didn't know or understand that he did. It's just that with the antisocial personality disorder, they don't care. It's just not what they would do, even if they know that's what they're supposed to do.
Okay, Dr. Scott, you indicated earlier on one of the numerous items that you reviewed were the birth records of Nikolas Cruz. What did you learn from reviewing the birth records?
Yes, I reviewed both the adoption records and his birth records. So from the birth records, I learned quite a bit. And
I'm going to show you, and I showed you this first, right? Yeah. Okay. These are already in evidence, but I wanted to show you particularly page 186, 187, 184, and 185. Dr. Scott, let me know if you had reviewed those pages and what you've learned from them.
Right, so I have reviewed this. I'll start with 186.
Okay.
And so 186 is kind of a form where they record information about his birth and the birthing process in and of itself. And on this form, it does note sometimes the umbilical cord can wrap around a little baby's neck. And the real question is if rather that causes harm or not to the baby. It can be benign or it can be not so good. Does it form what we call a knot? And so they have a checklist on here, and that does not a knot was not formed here. He did have 3 times the umbilical cords around him, but not in a way that it would have compromised his airway. It's a poor photocopy, but I know what his APGAR scores are. The APGAR scores are on here, and these are 5 ways you can monitor kind of a baby's quick reaction. They aren't necessarily predictive of long-term neurodevelopmental outcomes with an APGAR in and of itself, but it was developed as a screener, and his scores were 8 at 1 minute and 9 at 5 minutes. The other thing that is noted on this form is babies, sometimes when they come out, sometimes they can breathe spontaneously on their own. That's what we hope happens. That's the most common way. And so they checked that he did have spontaneous respiration, and they also checked that they did, which is also commonly done, bulb suction. So if a baby might have a fluid known as meconium in the amniotic fluid, typically the doctor or nurse might have a little bulb suction to make sure, quick in the mouth, and that's called suction. And that's what it looks like. The other thing is it did note that he had some meconium in the amniotic fluid. You may already know that that can be kind of part of a baby's bowel movement or other areas, and you can test the meconium and for drugs. And I understand it may be in another document, but his meconium was tested. It can test up to 90 days before. It's an actual scientific test, and he tested negative for exposure to drugs in the meconium. So things that would typically be tested would be things like cocaine or methamphetamine, maybe opioids or other drugs, and there was no evidence of that from the meconium report.
And you mentioned the APGAR score of 8 and 9. What does that mean?
Those are normal scores. The score that was 0 at 1 minute was that his color was off, but his heart rate was fine, so it's not related to his heart stopping. His respiratory effort was fine, so it's not related to him having troubles breathing. His muscle tone and reflexes were good, but sometimes baby come out and they aren't fully pink yet. And so you score it. Are they more bluish, partially blue, or fully pink? So by 5 minutes, he's now, the body is pink, but some of the extremities are still blue.
And what about the mask?
So there is, under the resuscitation, it says he had spontaneous respiration. Here they say there's no bag or mask, but there's an area on the second piece that's number 187, and it says resuscitation and that they put oxygen on him. And it's common, particularly if your color's a little blue, even if your heart's going okay and you're breathing, you put a little mask on the baby, and so I think that's what they did. They put an oxygen mask on him, and they noted that. But they also noted that he had spontaneous breathing from the get-go.
Anything else from the birth records?
Yes. So just to double check the other things from, he had a physician report, so they're checking him out, and everything was normal. They checked that his neurologic was normal on the physician's report of the child. His heart and lungs were normal. He went to a regular kind of baby unit or maternal ward, did not go to NICU. There was no evidence that he had to be resuscitated and needed to have a NICU, neonatal intensive care unit treatment. There is a checklist on one of the pieces of paper that said, quote, stimulation. So if you work in a delivery room, stimulation can be checked as a lot of different things you can do when the baby. So rubbing the skin would be stimulation. Wrapping them could be a stimulation. It does not mean that they had electrocardiac conversion, like they were, their heart stopped and you had to paddle them. It's just a way to stimulate the baby after they're born. And there's a range of ways you can do that.
So your conclusion of reading the birth records, Dr. Scott?
This was a normal weight, healthy baby boy that did not appear to have been exposed to drugs in the 3 months or so prior to his delivery, who spontaneously breathed. They put oxygen because he was a little blue than pinkish, and went off to the regular unit.
Okay. And you mentioned the adoption record, so I'd like to show you now of those adoption records, pages 310, 319, 320, 396, 399, 31, 32, 23, 284, and 197, and 319, Doctor. Have you reviewed those pages before?
I did.
Okay, I'd like to, first I should review these, right? Correct?
Yep.
Okay. Show you these. Tell us what your review of those indicated, please.
Okay. So, Mr. Cruz's mother put her baby up, as you know, for adoption, and so she has to fill out initially, probably around the first trimester or at the end of 3 months, a form gathering medical information about her pregnancy. And one of the questions says, when did prenatal care begin? Third month. Have you consumed any alcohol during the pregnancy? And she said, on this document, before 5 weeks, and she drank beer 3 times a week. And so on this document, she's acknowledging that she drank beer, but this is during the initial 5 weeks, not through the first 3 months. And She does, though, acknowledge that she is smoking cigarettes. So that's on there as well. So she's not completely denying everything. She said, I did drink beer, didn't after 5 weeks, but I am smoking cigarettes. There also is another checklist around this time that asks a whole bunch of different drugs, medicines, and which ones has she done or not at this point, and it says beer, 5 weeks of pregnancy. So again, it's consistent with that prior document.
Okay.
There are other documents, if it's just easier for me to point out.
Okay, go ahead. What page are you talking about?
I'm on page now 396.
Okay.
So on page 396, this is where they're actually doing the first intake. So the birth mother intake, I think they're evaluating, is she a good candidate to put a baby up for adoption and getting some background information. So on this document, they note that the mom's height is 5'3", so she's short-ish compared. I don't want to insult anybody, but she's on the shorter end there. And she's 3 months pregnant at the time. It does note that under prenatal care, that through the health department, and they have that she's taking vitamins, Medicaid's involved. So it looks like she was on vitamins at least at the time on 3/11/1998 when this intake was done. And also it notes that her 11-year-old daughter is living with the grandmother. On page 399, so I'm going to move on. Those are the key facts.
I wanted to talk about the visits.
Okay, yeah. So this is, it's kind of hard to read, but I'm familiar with it. This is a list of the different prenatal visits that she had after she has the intake and she gets involved in the system. It also has a list of the different drug screens that she had during the course of her being evaluated and treated. And so it does have at least, it looks like 4 prenatal visits noted on here, and also, hard to read, 4 urine drug screens as well. So it looks like she was monitored throughout. One of the things that when you read through the entire adoption file that's very interesting is at some point she got arrested and she went to jail. So she had to, as a condition of her arrest, she had to have random urinalysis. Now I've worked in a probation clinic, and there's a reason if you have someone go back in the community, they're on a random. That means something versus scheduled. The reason that we follow people for a random urinalysis is if they know the day they have to come in to be tested, they could, for example, have someone else maybe give them their urine and they could hide it and bring it in. A random urinalysis, and that's how it was noted in the notes, is very different. You don't tell the person. You show up, maybe they'll have it that day, maybe they won't, so that they can't smuggle in someone else's urine. I mean, we know that can be an issue, so that's why hers was ordered and noted as a random urinalysis, and those were noted in the record as negative. In addition to these prenatal visits, there were actually more. When you read, there are over 1,000 adoption pages just in this part of the file. But she also had follow-up for a sonogram. There was one time where she thought she might have a little spot bleeding, and so they called the hospital and talked to, or the clinic, and talked to her obstetrician. About a month prior, she thought she was having a premature contraction, so she was hospitalized briefly at a local hospital. So that's another monitoring where people could have seen if she was actively using drugs or alcohol. And in the month prior, she was also in a treatment facility of drugs and alcohol, which should make her use much less likely. And in the birth records, though I didn't mention it, there was no evidence that Nikolas was born with alcohol, that he was withdrawing from alcohol, that his vital signs indicated any kind of withdrawal from alcohol, and nor were they, if we get to the mother's OBGYN records on delivery, that she was in alcohol withdrawal of any kind either.
Okay. How about admitting to alcohol by the birth mother in the records? Did you see any of that?
I'm sorry, repeat the question?
Admitting to drinking alcohol.
Yes, in different ways. So there is a form. And I used to help fill out some of these forms when I was a med student and an intern when I worked on OBGYN, which kind of summarizes when they come in and when they leave. And so I want to get to the form when she first came in, because this is the discharge form. And let me find that real quick. Here it is. It's page 31 of 1450. So this is her intake form. And so you screen typically for a mom when they come in to having a baby, and you ask them questions on admission. So they ask her, are you smoking? She said yes, she smokes about 3/4 a pack a day. And then there's alcohol and street drugs. And they've written across that denies. All right, so on the admission, she is denying that. And then on her discharge paperwork, there are two aspects of this top part of the form. And one says, did she have anything, it's called significant prenatal history. So as a physician, if I think a mom's been drinking heavily, maybe the worst case I've ever seen in my life of alcohol, or there's concern about that, or they've reported that to me, that's where alcohol drinking typically would go. That would be your standard practice to have under significant prenatal history. Instead, there's another section which talks about psychosocial history. This means things, because they separate out prenatal versus psychosocial, things that you may have done in the past. And it does say there, patient admits to alcohol abuse, but we don't know the time frame. What we do know is they didn't write that under the prenatal time frame, but states recently in treatment. So it's unclear to me from these records, was she really drinking as much as people may have interpreted from saying she had a history of alcohol use when it's not noted under the prenatal history. So I thought that was relevant as well. There's another document that records, and I may need a little help finding it, her weight when she came in and what her pregnancy weight was. And I'm just going to take a moment because I think it's important as well. And I'm looking for that number. Well, someone may be looking for that. I did want to mention the document that we had left out. There is a document that has her birth weight, her pregnancy weight, and she had a substantial gain of weight, not loss of weight. I think it was maybe 177 pounds, and her pre-pregnancy weight was around 140 or something. So I know the records indicate there is a note that she lost weight between visits. We don't know how much weight she lost, but she overall had an appropriate significant amount of weight gain. And then one document I failed to mention, but it's an extremely important document, is number 197. And you may or may not know, she was at one point arrested one night with a colleague of hers, and there was arrest for possession of cocaine or something to the effect of that charge. So this was at night. She got taken to the jail. Again, I've worked in jails. And so she had a blood alcohol level drawn. And if you're thinking about the best test for if you're heavily drinking or not, and you're out at night, maybe, you're scoring or not scoring cocaine or whatever reason you were there, what was her blood alcohol on this random night where she was picked up? And it was 0. There's no evidence she was drinking that day. So there's not evidence from the birth record other than a past psychosocial history. There's not evidence from the jail record when she was randomly picked up and it was noted as 0. There's not evidence of alcohol withdrawal in her or the baby. And then over the course of while she was monitored for her pregnancy, so this is number 284, page 284, they did draw some blood work. So it's called a CBC, so it's a differential of different types. So there are 2 ways to look at alcohol exposure in an individual. One way is you can draw the blood and what was their blood alcohol level? Was it 0? You could breathe. What was their blood alcohol level? That's called a direct biomarker. It's direct. We're measuring the alcohol. There's another measure called an indirect biomarker. And that is, we know, think about it, alcohol can affect the kidney, right? So maybe if you're drinking a lot, the liver, your liver goes up, or your liver enzymes get bad. But it can also affect the red blood cells. So one test that not always, I want to be clear and fair, not always gets elevated with chronic alcohol abuse, but often does, is something that's a particular measure of the size of the red blood cell. And so she had that test done during the course of her pregnancy, and it's completely normal. It's below the cutoff of what is commonly seen if people are chronically abusing alcohol. So is the test perfect? No. Could she have been using it possibly in that particular test? That's possible, but it's another data point along the way. We have negative blood in the jail. We have a test that doesn't compute. We've got multiple examples of her saying no. We have admit that says denies, though has a past psychosocial history. So it raised questions to me about what was in reality the severity of the alcohol. And one of the things that I thought, made me pause and think about Mr. Cruz's mother and what was her thought or intent, or how did it relate to giving up this baby for adoption? Did she care for him? Did she not? She's working with an attorney that is helping place him with Mr. Cruz's adopted mother. And there's a note that's written in those records where she talks about she really would like to follow up with Nick after he's born to at least see how he's doing, so that if he ever needs, and I think the word is a liver or a kidney, but she expresses concern. So I try to balance in my mind a picture of someone who seems sort of almost reckless in how they're behaving with alcohol and drugs, has been alleged, versus trying to follow up to make sure her baby's okay, and if in the future anything was needed, she wanted to sort of at least touch base. So that just helped me give a context of all the information.
Okay. And Dr. Scott, you mentioned earlier when the items that you reviewed, you indicated prior mental health evaluations by child psychologists and child psychiatrists, correct?
Yes.
So what did your review determine from you reviewing those prior evaluations of his prior treating physicians?
So sticking to the physicians, because he had a lot of evaluations, but just going with the psychiatrist, the first psychiatrist I believe he saw was a Dr. Musil, M-U-S-I-L, and he was approximately 3.5 years old at the time. He was referred for issues related to either temper tantrums, there had been some biting noted in the preschool classrooms, so he's having a behavioral kind of evaluation. On that day, on the date that he was seen, and this is a child psychiatrist, and one of the things this child psychiatrist we're trained to do is we ask about developmental milestones. That's why we do 2 years of training. And we ask about things like speech and walking and talking, particularly if you're coming in at such a young age. excuse me, so Dr. Musel noted that his speech overall was normal, though his first words were at about 18 months. And so that is somewhat of a delay. First words typically we think of maybe 12 months, but some people, even in a normal bell curve, may not speak till 16 or 18 month sentences or words, but that was noted. Otherwise, I think he noted that speech was normal. So that was the first psychiatrist that saw him. He had a consideration or thought that attention deficit disorder might be to play there, and so he ultimately was treated by another physician who did prescribe him stimulant medications for attention deficit disorder. Now that's important too, because you may have heard a lot about fetal alcohol syndrome and fetal alcohol spectrum disorders, and it is true that inattention and problems concentrating can be a feature of both. So one might say, well, the docs just missed it. They didn't know enough about it, and somehow sort of they got it wrong. But if you look at the medical treatment for problems with attention and concentration, even if it is clearly fetal alcohol syndrome, and there's no argument this is ADHD, a stimulant treatment for ADHD is still the treatment. So it's not like he didn't get the appropriate medication treatment sort of along the way that would have been used to treat it, even if for some reason folks missed it. He was subsequently seen by other child and adolescent psychiatrists. One was a Dr. Ortiz. She was at Cross Creek, so I think it looked like she was maybe their child and adolescent psychiatrist that worked with them. Another was Linda Karff, and then a third was Dr. Brett Nagin. He was actually the last one to see Nikolas Cruz. Now they had a range of diagnoses, but they were kind of in the same cup, if you will, of what diagnoses might be. They were consistently attention deficit hyperactivity disorder as one of the diagnoses. One of the earlier ones said, it's interesting, the note says OCD, which stands for obsessive compulsive disorder, but from reading the school records, the counselor records at school, what I think they were calling OCD was, is it time for mom to pick me up yet? Can I play the Xbox? Are we there yet? Are we there yet? That's annoying, but that's not necessarily OCD. I couldn't find evidence of OCD. I did see that they tried a range of different medications. One of the earlier doctors, Dr. Karff, after, I think it was around the time where he may have attempted to stab the teacher or there was an assault in the classroom, did start him on a medicine to help with aggression and violence. Although it may not have an FDA approval, we commonly prescribe this for violence and aggression in youth, even if it's not a specific indication in the PDR, which is the physician's desk reference. And so he was tried on that. Some help, but not a lot. If you had to sum up the rest of his treatment, try different stimulants. Although he would tell me they never helped, there was a lot of records that said improved, mother sought them out, they were helpful to him, that documented they were helpful at different times. Maybe they lost some of their efficacy later on. And then his last psychiatrist was Dr. Brett Nagin, child and adolescent psychiatrist, I believe board certified in child and adolescent psychiatry. So that requires strong training, both in your training and preparation for the boards, knowledge of fetal alcohol syndrome, developmental disabilities. And so Nikolas was having, in the first half of the 8th grade at Westglades, a lot of behavioral difficulties. And so the support teams like Henderson are trying to work with a mom, should you have more of an evaluation? So she went for a neurology evaluation. The neurologist said he was normal. She did not ever officially go for, quote, an autism evaluation. And what Dr. Nagin wrote in his note, which kind of had a legacy that lives on, was rule out a pervasive developmental disorder. So as physicians, when we see someone, you know, they're saying he has this problem and this problem, we might have several things that we consider, and that means maybe we need to evaluate that further. It doesn't mean that that's ultimately what diagnosis you're going to land on or is the correct diagnosis over time. So Dr. Nagin did note that he had problems with interacting with other people, and he did, and social skills issues. And in Westglades, I've described some of those challenges, and he did have impaired social skills, but ultimately, in his final notes, he coded that under a disruptive behavior disorder, which is like conduct disorder. That was not his final diagnosis, that he had this autism or that form of neurodevelopmental disorder. It did indicate, though, that he received treatment from 3 different psychiatrists who all uniformly thought he met the criteria for ADHD.
And how about psychologists?
Numerous psychologists throughout the course of his treatment, starting early on. I do think, and I think the record shows, that he had some early developmental delays. I think the early testing did show that he had some speech and language delays when he was 3, 4, 5. Some of the evaluations, and I'm not sure why, I know from the earlier pediatric and psych records that he was recorded as speaking at age 18 months, but as time goes on, he gets age 3, he gets age 4, the mother starts to report the delays as first words 3 or 4, but we have a record that says it was not that severe of a delay. We have an actual note of when he first spoke the words. I don't know why that got put into the subsequent records, but that was part of subsequent speech and language evaluations, that his delay was much further along than in reality it was. That's just something that the record showed. But he had numerous psychological evaluations, speech and language evaluations. I do think he had some early speech and language delays and was developmentally delayed in that area. But you can see, and you've seen some of the clips, that a lot of his expressive skills, his reading skills, caught up greater than what you might have expected if you just read the early records.
Okay, and what did you learn about the treatment and the interventions that existed with the defendant?
Yeah, so he had one of the largest range of interventions from age 3, 3.5 that, I mean, it's robust that I've ever seen. So let's just go over some of the major categories.
Doctor, before you do that, Mr. Sykes, I think we need to take a 10-minute recess for folks to use the restroom.
Sure.
Okay? Ladies and gentlemen, please do not discuss the case among yourselves. Please leave your notepads behind.